Okay, and here we go, the final texture. So last uh, last time I taught this class, we did chrome as one of the final textures, but I think it's very similar to gold. Like if you look at these images of the chrome, it's just the silver version of the gold. Now, parts of these are even more reflective. Chrome is basically a mirror finish. So it's like a mirror that is in a sphere shape that's wrapping around. So it's highly reflective. Here's someone's just traditional oil painting, and you can see how clearly you can see the room reflected around it. So if you want to try out Chrome on your own, that's fine. But the reason why we're not doing it together is just because it's so similar to the metal one that we've already done. It's just you know, it's silver colored rather than gold colored. So what we will be doing is a gem sphere, like this type of geode thing. Gems I think are really fun to paint. It's kind of like the gummy one in terms of the color and some of like the how the light bounces around inside the semi-translucent form, and then you have these interesting facets which catch the light and have strong reflections. For the cube one, when you're doing this on your own, just make sure to give it a pretty wide bevel on the sides that you'll be able to see it. You can see how it's semi-translucent too, like the gummy one. I picked some other references where it's like fused into a rougher rock. So maybe if you want to have some like black rough rock hanging out on the bottom, or you want to give it this weird stair step texture, you can do that as well. Or here's, if you want to deform part of the cube natural gem into this type of shape, you can feel free to do that. Here's another one just showing some of the cool crystalline structure. They're just very pretty. Gems are very pretty to paint, so we'll finish up with a fun one here. Let's push that off to the side and get into the actual painting. I'm making a new layer, getting a selection around the sphere portion itself. Soft round brush. Let's take a look at what's going on with these gems. So one thing that you can see is that there's a lot of layering happening. So the actual surface is kind of glossy, but then inside we've got this milky, semi-translucent texture in there. So what that's going to require is some softer blending underneath some sharper, hard reflections. And this like fragmented crystal stuff there, the white broken fractured lines, that's going to be sharper painting. But if you look beyond that, you'll see these soft gradients. Okay. Really nice soft gradient of this purple into the white, into the green. This one I just got for some of the gem reflections. Okay. Here, soft gradients underneath that more rocky, crystalline structure. So that's how we're going to set this one up. So I don't have this accidentally become semi-translucent. I'm just going to fill the whole thing in, completely opaque. And then I'm going to start getting colors directly from the photos. I'm just color picking around to get some of these different purples. So you've got some warmer purples, some cooler purples. Build up that color complexity. If we zoomed out pretty far, you can see color-wise, we're starting to match up pretty well. I really like this green down at the bottom of this amethyst. So just grabbing some of these green colors, maybe even start to softly mimic that pattern. I'll have it come up a little more on this side. Okay, liking that. That's looking good. Maybe a little more of that darker green. Let's looking to see, is there anything else that's kind of fun and cool looking with these other gems. I like some of this really dark purple up here. Maybe get more of this magenta purple there. This is a nice color. Soften up that gradient a little more. Maybe even push back some of that green flowery shape I had. All right, I think that's looking pretty good. Like base colors are laid in nicely. Now it's time to start layering on top of this. So I'll deselect that. I'm going to make a layer mask first. And I really like how some of these spheres are broken. So we don't have a complete sphere. We've got little bits of this amethyst crystal sticking up, and then it goes into the smooth texture. Same thing with this one. We've got this big broken area and like open crystals inside, but the rest of it's really smooth. Same thing here. We've got like this mouth of crystals. This one's kind of fun. It's I actually don't even know how they polished it. Maybe some of these don't stick up as far, but we've got crystals sticking out of the sphere. So we have smooth areas, and then we have the more jagged areas of the crystal. So I want to recreate something similar to this. So I'm going to go in with a hard round brush, using it as an eraser of sorts on a layer mask. And I'm just carving out one side of this form. Okay, trying to make it look a little rough and jagged. Trying to get an interesting shape. To then start building up and painting the rest on. Okay, that's looking okay. Thinking I might want the whole thing to be rotated a little bit. Yes, that's looking better. Happier with that idea. Up a little more. Oops. Still not quite happy with the overall shape of this. I really want to get the silhouette of this down first, because a lot of these silhouette shapes will define the crystals that I paint in. So I'm being a little bit more persnickety and particular with this initial shape. It's a little too fragile. You can feel free to skip ahead until I start actually painting some more. This is just going to be me fussing with this for a little bit. Okay, so we're good now. We're good with this. Let's clip that in. I think one of the first things I want to start doing is defining some of these very strong reflections, these bright white spots that make the crystal look really shiny and reflective. So just taking a quick gander at what we got to work with. I like some of these shapes down here. You can see in the reflections themselves too, there's a little bit of a gradient to them. They're not solid white. They're like barely transparent, mostly opaque, barely transparent, and a little bit of a gradient to them. So I'm going to get the lasso tool, and because I want angular edges to these, I'm going to make sure it's the polygonal lasso tool. So that's the one that's got the angles to it. And I'm holding down Shift when I create a new selection for this. I'm just really kind of randomly making these shapes, kind of looking at the reference down in the bottom right to get an idea for where they would go. I don't like that. I almost linked two together, but I'm really not seeing a lot of that happening with the reference. Okay, it's probably good enough for the moment. Get a new layer, get the hard round elliptical brush with a little bit of transfer. We could also use the soft round brush for this. I'm going to go pure white and then paint in these highlights. Now you don't want them all to be the exact same value. Okay, so some of them are going to be a little bit lighter. Some of them are going to be a little bit stronger. Okay, zooming out. They're reading pretty well. It's looking okay. So I'll deselect that, make a new layer. I'm going to drop it underneath because I'm going to start going in and putting in the darker values. So getting some of this dark purple. And now I am hand painting in some of these crystalline shapes. Look how many different colors of purple I'm getting. To really have this read well, you want different hues, you want different values. So after I paint a couple strokes, I go back to the photo, I resample the color. And that's just going to ensure that I build in some color complexity into the painting at an early stage. That'll help with realism. That'll help with the overall read. It'll also make the painting look like it's, you know, coming together and finishing a bit faster. That can be a really frustrating part of a painting when everything looks like a mess and nothing feels like it's being resolved. It can be very disheartening. It makes you want to stop working on the image. And really, I found like half the battle of painting is just figuring out how you can set yourself up for little tiny successes so you get motivated to continue painting. Because regardless, if you have a good painting or a bad painting, you lose in terms of leveling up your painting ability as soon as you stop. As soon as you quit the painting, you're no longer learning, you're no longer growing. And the people who get really good at painting, they have either personalities that allow them to do repetitive tasks sitting alone in their studios better than other people. I'm not one of those people. I have to actively try and tie myself to the chair and continue working on projects. Okay? But some people who are just like phenomenal painters, way better painters than I'll ever be in my lifetime, they have personalities that help them with that. It's an interesting misconception. People talk about like talent, and there are definitely some people that are just, you know, you look at them and you're like, wow, you've got to have some type of gift or special knowledge and ability that I don't have. I've heard of painters with photographic memory, so that would be a big help because you would have all your reference stored directly in your head, so it'd be a lot easier for you to recall specific details about things. But I think one of the big ones I've seen that helps out a person paint is if they're more introverted, because then you enjoy just being secluded and working on your own stuff. And if you don't mind doing the same thing over and over and over again, because that's what a lot of painting is, a lot of repetition. Or like this, you know, going around and making tiny little blobs of color and then in the end they will hopefully coalesce together and become something that looks pseudo-realistic. So this first phase is building up some of the forms, getting the light side and shadow side of some of these crystalline structures, and making the topography of this inner portion of the sphere read as if it is really, rocky. I think this is built up enough that I should start building up some other areas and then revisit this once I have a little more context. So let's take another look at the rest of these spheres. So we've got these cracks and this kind of shattered, fractured looking element. So that's going to be lighter value and some thinner lines that kind of bleed into bigger shapes, maybe some areas of lighter tone that then gradate out. Let's look at this, same thing, lighter shapes that kind of have pretty well defined edges to them. Right. This one's a little more high key in terms of all of its values, so it's a little harder to see some of those cracks. This one we really can't see much of the cracks at all, so I'm pretty much going to be referencing these two images here to get this shattered glass look to the crystal. I'm going to make a new layer for this. I'm going to color pick some of this lighter value and then just make some of these marks that a bit more angular in nature. A few little pockets where there's really bright highlight. You can see that here and here. There's these little bright specks. Find some areas that are a little darker. And I just want to build up a little patch of this texture. A little patch of this variety. And then we're going to be copy pasting this to quickly build up the rest of the sphere with this shattered texture. Just zooming out to take a look at it. It's almost there, maybe a little more. The light value there and there. All right, that's looking all right from a distance. So Control J, Control T. Take this form, copy it over. Control J, Control T. Control J, Control T. Copy this over. I'm going to warp this last one. That way I can really wrap it around the side of the sphere here. Make it feel like it's bending. Warping around. Come on, there we go. All right. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to start layering these on top of each other. Let's toss a couple up here. Okay. I think that's enough. Right, so you can see quickly generated a bunch of this texture. It's looking closer to this now. It's not as well designed as this reference though. There's different shapes in here, but I've gotten the bulk of the complexity in. So from here, I'll take the soft eraser. I'm just going to knock away some of the sharpness of this texture. And now, on the same layer, time to start hand painting in more of the specifics of this. So going in, editing some of these shapes. Trying to break up some of the repetition that was caused by the copy-paste action in Photoshop. And now, let's just pull in this reference right here. I set it right next to my painting. And I'm just going to reference these shapes very specifically. I'm going to pull the value from them, and I'm going to try and recreate the actual shapes that I'm seeing as well. Okay. And at this phase, I am painting like I would in any traditional class, any observational traditional class. I'm looking at the reference and I'm trying to copy exactly what I see. And this is what will help bring some realism and uniqueness to this, because I'm copying these specific unique shapes directly from the reference. If this was an illustration of like a character, I would want to have, let's say the character's wearing a hat. You would want to have a really good reference of a hat. So that way you can paint it in and you can bring a lot of that realism in there. What you don't want to do, and what can often happen in a more complex painting, is you start guessing at what stuff should look like. And that's never a good place to be in. I don't think I've ever had a painting of a prop or an environment that I guessed at a bunch of stuff in it and had it turn out looking realistic in the slightest. Even if you're going for something really out there, having some reference to ground it in, or at least pull some design ideas off of, is really crucial. All right. Okay, just working my way around. Now we don't need to copy the entire reference photo. I'm just looking at it, seeing the stuff that's the most interesting, and then trying to add that into my painting. And then once I've spent a little time doing this, getting some of these really unique shapes translated over, if we zoom out now, this is looking a lot more unique. I haven't painted that much. Let me swap colors real quick. I painted this, and a little bit down here, just 4 areas. All the rest was copy and pasting. But because I have that copy and paste underlay that really adds complexity, I don't need to, one, be as careful with recreating this because I've already got built-in complexity. And then 2, I don't have to spend as long in this phase, again, because the sort of underlying complexity, the stuff people aren't going to be looking at, that is built in with the under painting we were doing earlier. All right, and I think that's good for now. Again, with these, you want to kind of keep track of your time. It's actually very nice doing the recording because I can see the timer going. So we're like 23 minutes into this right now. I could spend a lot more time on painting this fragmented crystalline reflections. I need to work on this still. I need to go back. I need to work on this. The top looks awful still. There's nothing in there. So there's big pieces I need to fit in that don't involve rendering this even more. So I'm going to stop right here on this one. I am going to quickly, though, make a copy and warp this a little bit. See if I can get more of a curve. It was starting to flatten out with some of my paintings, so I want to bring back in some of the actual form of this crystalline area. Just expand that a bit. Oh no, now I'm flattening out again. Stretch it. I'm trying to get it to fill the space still, but also curve a little bit more. I think that's all right. Let me toggle back to the original, new one. Yeah, there's definitely a nicer curve now going through the middle. Okay, happy with that. Let's focus a little bit on this facet down here. I also like this crust, that rough outer crust from the bottom example. So I might do a bit of both with this. I will grab some of these values. Let's start painting in a little bit more of a defined edge to this. Looking at it, it's got some like speckling to it, so I'm using the hard round 567 brush to see if that gives me a more natural edge. I think it might be a little bit too translucent, so going back to 561. This has a little bit of texture, but also a little more opacity. I like this little chunk taken out of the bottom there. That's pretty cool. So let's add that in. A little divot inside of the stone itself. A little bit of a bevel. Cool. All right, just painting these striations in, a little more opaque. Editing the shape of this as well. I didn't like how it was wrapping so evenly around the bottom, so now I'm making it more, a little more asymmetrical. Okay, pushing this back. All right, that's looking better. It's flattening out because I'm painting with such flat color. So let me see if I can just naturally darken up some of these areas, have them push out in the way. More color. Yeah, that's kind of rounding it out a bit. I might be making a mess of this now. I might try and fix this with multiply. Again, multiply does not do a good job with color. It really darkens up your shadow. So if I can fix this with actual pigment, okay, just painting darker values in and having that read, then that would be my preferred choice. Okay, I think that's looking all right now from the distance. I'm going to come back to this crust portion and maybe add a little bit of a rough crust to the side of it. There's more problems now. So you'll find as you go through a painting, this is getting pretty resolved. This is getting pretty resolved. And now we can see how unresolved the top is and how much more the middle could be resolved. So it's good to bounce around to different areas. We still haven't even put in the cast shadow yet, so that's another important detail that should probably go in pretty soon. But I'm going to work on the next most unresolved area, which is this top portion, and then probably cast shadow, and then revisit the first thing we were painting, which is the center of the crystal structure. So looking at this, I'll make a new layer just so I don't mess up some of the older stuff. Okay, kind of referencing the top here and here where we've got patches of like this sharper white texture, and then patches of this purple intermingling with it. There's like these little highlighted areas. Okay, the bevel of the crystal itself catching the light. really shrinking my brush size, adding in these like hairline light cracks to it. I've got a lot of the same color purple, so I'm going to try and differentiate that a bit. Let's put in some other hues for this purple color. Okay, zooming out, that's looking good now. It's got some complexity built into it. And I think at this phase, again, this is definitely not perfect. I can see there's some big problems with some of the shapes I have in there. But before I get sucked into tiny details, keep moving. What's another big piece that you don't have yet? And for me, that would be the cast shadow. So get that shape, color pick the ground plane, halfway to black. Let's fill that in. Let's zoom out a bit here. That's looking pretty good. I like the warmth. Maybe I'll cool off this tail end here where we'd see more of the fill light coming in. Darken this up. Zoom out. That's looking good. Very nice. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. You just soften up that shadow. And then, before I continue on with detailing, I need to get a little more form to this. So multiply. Let me get a purple color. Yeah, that's good. I'm using like a purple for the shadow. I need to round out this form a lot more. It's getting real flat. So darkening up the sides to help round this out. Looking good. Just lower the opacity. I'm about 80% opacity. Toggle it on and off. I think that's looking nice now. I get a good sense of the roundness of the form, but it's not getting too dark. Let's also at this point put in I'm going to put a rim light. This is fairly artificial. Like rim lights aren't that natural, but they do a good job of really showing off your form. And for the rim light on the other side, I'm just going to make it warmer. Just like the last video, I was talking about wanting to differentiate the two sides of your object. If you have a cool value on one side, you want to put a warm value on the other side. I think I'll even maybe put a little bit of this ground color on the bottom of this object just to warm up that space. That might be a little bit too much. As I toggle this on and off, it's really obliterating the shadow I had there. So let's pull that back. Yeah, no, you know what? I thought it was a good idea. Not a good idea. It's messing too much with my shadow. The form is more important than like a little bit of subtlety in the lighting. So if we turn those off, you can see pretty flat right now. Multiply layer, instant volume, and then the rim lights help define the form a bit more. And I'd say this might be getting a bit heavy. I'm just going to knock that top one back a bit. All right, I'm liking that. Okay. So the reason I'm putting those in now is because as I start moving into the detail phase, those rim lights are going to obscure areas that I don't really need to paint because it'd be interrupting, this rim light here would be going over the area I'd paint anyways. So it's just helping me figure out what do I need to spend more time painting, what's already looking pretty good. All right, so back up here, trying to adjust some of the shapes that I made. bring down a little more of that white value. Start getting in some of the facets of these crystalline structures. So looking at these, you can see they have very sharp, hard defined edges to them. So getting defined planes. They also have a little bit of an interior glow. So if you have one value and then you put a more saturated version of that value in it, it'll make it seem like it's a little more translucent and it's glowing and you can see into it a bit. This is a bad thing I just did here. These 4 colors all lined up, all very vertical, and they're like a candy cane. You know, it's the exact same colors, exact same value. They're stacked up on each other. So this, let's just shift that one a little more blue. There we go. Okay. So now I've got different colors, different shapes, and we're not getting as weird of a stacking thing happening. All right. One thing I think I'm missing in the middle, if I look at this one in particular, see all these fine, tiny highlights on the crystal and defining the bevels of those triangular shapes of the crystal? I don't really have those in my painting at the moment. And going back here, there's none of those little bright white bevels. So that's what I'm going to start adding in next. It's little bevels. There's like little pockets of, I don't know if it's some type of just like ground up crushed material or what, but I see a lot of these little white divots in there. So adding in these, this will start adding a bunch of detail and definition to my forms. In terms of where are you putting these, like what am I looking at? Where are you trying to figure out where these go? I'm thinking about the forms. I'm thinking about the structure, the pyramid-like structure of these crystals. And at each of the bevels on the crystal, I'm adding in this form. Okay. Zoom out. You can see that's helping. It's making it feel more realistic. Okay, just thinking about where there might be some cracks, putting in little deposits of this white reflected value. Okay, and then time for the soft eraser to go in and just fade some of this out. You don't want them all to be pure white. If it's all one value, all one intensity, it's going to really flatten things out. So adding a bit of a faded gradient to these will help them sit at different points in space. Toggle that on and off. You can see, particularly from a distance, like now we're getting an idea of the form. What do these crystals look like? We're getting a good sense of their shape at the moment. And at this point, we're pretty much done with this. There's not too much left to do. We're going to do a little bit of like a glowing effect. I'm going to throw in a bit of rougher texture because there's so much so many small, tiny fragments, shapes. Adding a little bit of texture so it's not all soft will help that out. We'll sharpen it, and then this one will be good to go. So I'm just going to continue painting a little bit more with this. I like this really dark purple, so I think I'll go in a few more places with this really dark blackish purple color and try and define out some of the deeper crevices. This area right here is just kind of a blob at the moment, so maybe think about how I could build this up, make it more dimensional. I was just looking at all this gray here. I just wanted to bring a little more color down into the transition. And then I'll, soft round brush, just fade it back in to get more of a gradient, but at least it's got a bit more color bleeding down into that bottom portion now. Let's take a look at this. So I'm looking at this reference. I'm seeing that in these darker areas, there's also these like reflected sides of the facets of the gems. So I'll maybe color pick that and then start adding those in, those reflected sides as well, intermixed in all of this darker grayish black area. It's too blue. Okay, I think that's working. It's looking pretty good. Let's put a few bevels on this. Define those sharper crystal structure shapes. You can get a gradated highlight on this one. Okay, I think we are pretty close to wrapping up the detail on this one. There's some things sharpening in Photoshop can really help bring out some of the extra texture. We're going to add a little bit of a glowing effect. That'll help as well. And then a little bit of a textured brush to give some noise to this. Those will help add some of the micro details to it. Before I get to that, I do want to incorporate the environment a little bit more. So I'm thinking maybe getting a slightly stronger reflection of the ground plane in here. Just take this whole layer. Something like this, maybe on the front. I just wanted to get it a little more glossy feeling, the entire sphere. Like this really smooth part here, I want that to feel a little more glossy. So going back to the glossy forms that we did, how they have very sharp reflections that are kind of faded out there. I think that's helping. And maybe let's get another highlight as well on the back. Yes. Just wanted to feel a little more reflective. It was feeling kind of matte, and looking at these, they do have a nice reflective quality to them. So adding in, just a couple reflections is good. And then the next thing was, if I look at all these crystals, they're all very purple, and none of them are picking up some of the blue in the background. So going in and finding some of the faces of the crystal that are pointed out towards the background, and just adding a little bit of this blue background color into some of the facets of this amethyst. That'll also help tie it in to its environment. And then I'll use the soft round brush and just fade them out. Okay, so it's just a slight color shift. I don't want it to be obvious, like real obvious blue light on there. Okay, just a subtle pushing of that purple color into the blue spectrum. It'll trick the viewer into thinking, that this exists, that this is a real thing. Okay. I'm liking this so far. one thing as I'm looking at this, I want the crystal area to be bigger, but there are so many layers to this crystal area now. So it's going to be hard for me to do any real editing with it at its current state. So often what I'll do when I reach this point in a painting is I will take all of my layers and group them. If I zoom in here, you can see in this group, we have everything that is part of the sphere so far. I can then take the group and drag it onto the new layer icon, and that'll make a copy of everything there. And then if I use Control E, I can flatten it out. So now I have one flattened version of my painting. And with this, I can turn off my old one. I'm going to duplicate the flattened version. And I'm going to transform it. I'm just going to enlarge the whole thing. Just bring it down a bit more because I want more of that crystal area. Add a layer mask to it, and then let's just erase out to get some of these transitions to be a little more natural. I don't want that there. I might have to do some more painting, and then definitely erase out the bottom portion. Bring back a lot of what I had in there before. All right, so that's my original one. There's my new one. So a lot more of the crystal stuff. There's this repeated thing on the top. I need to fix that. I think I've got most of my other weird reflections. It works pretty well with something like this because we don't have any sort of logical structure to it. The crystal structure is more chaotic in terms of its appearance. So I'm going to come up here. Let's just paint that out. We've got those two white lines that are repeating themselves. So let's just paint out one of them, change that shape. Well, it's looking pretty good. Now, this is getting to like 49 minutes, so however much time you want to spend on the crystals is kind of up to you. I'm going pretty in depth with this, but that's also because I enjoy painting this type of subject matter. I think it's really fun getting those reflections, getting all of these different facets in there. So for yourself on this first one, give yourself like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours tops. Don't go over 2 hours on this. Okay? Force yourself to stop because you've also got the cube to do after this one. So 2 hours at most working on this crystal sphere. Okay, let's put on the finishing touches now. I'm futzing around a bunch. New layer, set it to color dodge. I'm going to get the brush, soft round brush. I'm going to color pick, and I'm pushing the color to more blues, and then let's see what the red. Yeah, I like the red. This adds some nice color variety to it, and it's going to help with that glowing effect that we want to get for the crystal. This glowing sensation of light being trapped inside of this substance and bouncing around. So I'm overstating it, and then with the soft round brush going back in and painting out areas there. Okay, so without it, with it. I'm losing some of the blue reflections I had. I like those blue areas, so I'm painting that out now. Toggling back and forth, just seeing what do I like about the old painting, what do I like in terms of changes for this new one. If we add a little more pink down here, that's working pretty well. Yeah, I think that works. One thing that's bugging me, this is sort of a design thing. I have 4 very similar shaped highlights all kind of lined up in this circle. I don't like that. That's not good design. It's too much repetition. And it's an even number. In design, you want odd numbers because then your audience is looking for that final pairing. So if you have 3 of something, they find one pair and then they go, okay, I see another one. I see a third one. Where is its pair? And that searching that the viewer goes through is interest. They're interested in finding that 4th shape to pair with that particular part of the painting or design. So getting rid of that, and then I want to change the shape of this one. I want to make this one a little smaller, and I'll make this one a little bit smaller too. There we go. Now it's not so even. There's an odd number. They're not quite as even. I still not liking it entirely here. There we go. Edit up even a little more. Change this one even a little more. Okay, that's better. Not perfect, but I'm going to try and wrap up this demo since we've been going a little longer than the others. All right, the color dodge phase, done. Next phase, subtle texture. So the hard round 567 brush, I'm going to color pick and just a couple dots, okay, to get this like dotted noise texture. This is going to remove some of the smoothness. It's very easy for a digital painting to get too smooth, and there's so many little micro textures in real life objects that you want to have some of that in your work. Right? Everything can't be smooth, otherwise it starts looking kind of boring, and like your viewer starts going to sleep visually because they've seen everything. They're like, oh, everything has that exact same smooth look to it. So see, this has a bunch of little differences to it where it's overdone. Soft round brush, just push it back and forth, paint and erase, okay, that's good. Let me toggle this on and off. Okay. Kind of see it just adds one more level to everything. I'm going to select all my layers again, drop them on the new layer so I can flatten it, and then filter, sharpen, unsharp mask. Let's crank this up. All right, layer mask. Fill it all the way with black to hide all the sharpening, and then now I can go in and paint in the sharp detail. So anywhere I want really nice, sharp, defined lines. On a lot of these bevels, I want it to be pretty sharp. On some of the speckled texture, I want it to sharpen up because that's going to give the impression of like those micro details I was talking about. I'm going to switch back to white. I want to soften up some of these areas that should be falling into like a shadow or stuff that's moving away from me. So in the crevices of the crystal, I don't want those to be sharp. I want the parts that are sticking up. I want these parts to be really sharp, but then if it's a crevice, I want that crevice to read as further away, so that needs to soften up. Okay. Further away, softer, closer to you, sharper. And then also consider that the human eye has 2% of its field of vision in focus at any given time. So that's going to be one small area of the painting. You don't want the whole thing to be in focus. So toggling this on and off. I'll zoom in so you can maybe see it a little bit better on YouTube here. So that sharpening phase, particularly for anything that's really jagged, like this rock crystalline texture, really helps. Okay, I think this is pretty much it. I'm going to try one more thing, and that is a little bit of bloom. So a new layer that's not clipped, and just on top of some of the reflections, painting that soft white value. And then painting it back out again. To get a little bit of sparkle. Onto this. I don't know if it's looking too good here. Let's try it a little more local to the highlights here. I think I made mine a little too spread out and diffused. And you just want a little bit of bloom on the really bright highlights. I wasn't painting with pure white. That's why they were also a little dull looking. Okay. Okay, looks good. Still not quite happy with my values, so I'm going to try one more multiply layer. At this point, you're done. You can start working on it. I'm just so invested in it now that I want to finish this up. But you get the idea. You are good to go to start painting this up yourself, or if you've gotten to this point, feel free to stop. You've got the cube, and then that's going to be it. That'll finish up textures. I'm going to make one more video talking about our next project, which is going to be a multi-textured still life. So I'm going to give you a line drawing, and you're going to have to texture each object a different texture from the ones that we've done in class so far, or if you want to venture out and try some new textures, you can do that as well. Okay, but that'll be its own video. You're good to go at this point. You know the drill. And if you want to stick around for a little bit longer while I try and wrestle with some of the values here, feel free to do so. I'm using Control U. That brings up the hue saturation adjustment, and I'm just seeing if I add more saturation to the shadow or change the hue of it, if that will help. Can multiply deadens your colors. So here I'm hyper saturating the shadow to see if I can get a more natural looking color. Okay, just toggling this on and off. That helps with the roundness, but man, does it look black. Looks way too dark. Let's see if this helps. That's a little better. It still makes it kind of look dark and muddy. Yeah, I think that's all right. I'm gonna try one more thing. I'm going to do a really sharp rim light on this side and on here as well. I should have done layer mask. This is why I do layer masks. I tried to erase it out, didn't like how I erased it, and then I just had to Control Z to go back. Okay. Yeah, I think that helps. Now that this brighter white reflection, I think that's helping to pull and wrap around the form a bit more, adding a little more form to it. Okay, again, if you've gotten this far, you do not need to continue watching this. I'm in it now. I'm invested. I want to finish this and make it look super pretty and perfect. I'm adding a little more of a highlight on the smooth surface before it transitions into the really craggy, crystalline, rocky area. Yeah, that helps. That really helps round out the form more. All right, let's do another pass of that. Maybe a little bolder, bring it down a little more, bring it more on the top. Let's make this more of a blue. Thinking about differentiating my colors as I wrap around the sphere in different areas. All right, layer mask. Start fading that out. There we go. I think what I was looking at is that the roundness, for those of you that are still here and care, the roundness of it right here had the same purple value. And so because of that, they were taking up the same distance in space. So like this was equal distance to this, even though in reality, if you're looking at it from the side, you would have the curved lip and then it goes inwards to these rocky crystal structures. So in order to really show that difference, I went in and lightened up the values right near the bevel, and then that makes it feel more like it's kind of curving and going into the form. All right, so I'm gonna call it good right there. I'm happy enough with that. So thank you very much for sticking through it all. I hope that things are going well. I know it's not the most optimal learning situation. Feel free to email me if you have questions, reach out if you want to talk via video chat, if you want me to like look over your work via video chat, walk stuff through any of these demos, I'm happy to do so. Just let me know and we'll set up a time to meet. All right, stay healthy everyone, and I will see you in the next video talking about the project. All right, bye for now.